Thank you. This is an honor. This is one of my favorite places in the world. I've been coming here since the 1970s. Yeah, I'm old. Thanks for joining. We're going to talk about a couple of topics that are really important to me and looks like to a lot of others as well. Monarchs and milkweeds and that connection between those two. And I'm going to talk about it from a gardener's perspective to some degree, but we're going to look at a little bit of the science and learn about these different organisms. So today we're going to chat about the butterfly and give you a few insights that you might not know about monarchs. Talk about their food plant and of course that connection. Their overwintering challenges and some of the overwintering issues and conservation concerns, and then we'll finish up on what we can do, how we can help monarchs recover and bring them back to their former abundance. So that's the plan. Let's see how we do on that. So we'll start off with understanding the butterfly a little bit, so that everybody knows a little bit about, a little more about monarch butterflies. Probably this is where your interest in monarchs started, and maybe even is being sustained. It's just, as a child, we're all still children, but your children and your grandchildren, and just the interaction of such a one amazing creature with us as humans. This is my granddaughter, she's a star of the show. So it's kind of where, a human connection, probably monarchs might be probably the most iconic insect in the world. Maybe the honeybee might be the challenger, but almost anybody in the world will know monarchs and the image of a monarch. So, very passionate. So, talk about a little bit about the life cycle and the biology of the monarch, so that we can put things in context. Well, we'll start with the egg. The adult lays an egg. We'll talk about the plants in a minute. That egg persists on its host plant, or its specific host plants, for about 3 or 4 days. During that 3 or 4 day period, it changes in color a little bit. Just before the larvae emerges, the egg lightens and becomes sort of translucent, like the image on the right. And then a little caterpillar comes out of that egg. That caterpillar starts eating immediately. Often it will eat its shell first, which gives it a little bit of energy, and it starts consuming the plant that it's deposited on, which is the milkweed, of course. That caterpillar will persist as a caterpillar for about 2 weeks, depending on weather and food abundance, but it's that range. And during that 2-week period, while it's in the larval stage, the caterpillar stage, it'll shed its skin 4 times, about 5 what are called instars. So 5 growth stages that are part of that larval growth. The skin doesn't expand very well, so as it grows, it has to leave one skin behind and then it assumes a new one. So about 2 weeks of larvae, and during that period, eventually they become quite large and very, very colorful. They have these appendages, both on their front of their bodies and on the rear of their bodies. There's conjecture as to what their purpose is, but it's probably a defense to predators, to protect them. So the caterpillar is very distinctive, not to be confused with other larvae and other butterfly caterpillars that you might see. That's what they look like. They're very, very pretty, kind of showy. And after that 2-week larval feeding period, the butterfly transforms itself into a chrysalid or a pupa as well. And that chrysalid usually doesn't hang from the plant that it's feeding on. Generally, the larvae will crawl down off of the plant and crawl a foot or two, sometimes 10 or 15 feet, to something to pupate on, to move into this stage. Usually not on the same plant. So if you see a larvae crawling along the ground, it's nice and big and plump. You don't need to pick it up and put it back on the plant. It's probably making a little trip to where it's going to hang upside down and move into its next stage. As that chrysalid matures and the butterfly inside of it matures and grows, the chrysalid eventually becomes clear. You'll be able to see the wings and the color of the monarch through it, and shortly thereafter it will break through and emerge and expand and pump fluids into its wings and harden its wings. That hatching process takes a few hours. The monarchs are often vulnerable during that period. And then once the wings harden and stiffen, then the monarch moves on. And it's now an adult monarch. This is all, of course, metamorphosis, which certain insects go through. Well, one of the first things that a monarch does is have a little sex. And one of the, it's proven to reproduce itself and to continue its existence, so it can't do that until it mates. So it's looking for a mate right away and finding one. This is a male monarch at the top and a female at the bottom. If you're really into monarchs, you can tell males and females by this little sort of enlarged black portion on the hind wing that indicates that it's a male. And so they'll mate, and at that point, now the monarch's ready to start its next stage, which is traveling. And monarchs are probably most famous for maybe this aspect. They migrate, an incredible migration. And so that monarch heads out on its travels. Now, we'll talk about kind of where that travel is in just a second, but it might be traveling from here in Newport Beach, where it may have hatched, or it might have hatched somewhere in the desert or in the Great Plains, or who knows where. But it's traveling as soon as it emerges and mates. It's moving across the country. And it's doing that on migration. By the way, it's still traveling in an odd way. That's the British spelling of the word. There's only one L. So that monarch now it's flying, it's moving through gardens and through canyons and hillsides and so on. And what's it doing? It's doing more of this reproduction. It's already mated, but it's got about 200, 300 eggs in its abdomen that it needs to deposit, or potentially could deposit. So that's what it's doing. It's depositing those eggs as it's traveling through the western United States, in this case. And that cycle is happening behind it. So as it's moving, eggs are being deposited, larvae, chrysalids, and ultimately more monarchs. This is one of the more important slides to understand monarch migration and monarch patterns. And to some of you, this is going to maybe surprise you. Some of you already know this, but we have two populations of monarchs in North America. Monarchs, by the way, are an American species. They're basically North America, to some degree in Central America, and barely into a few in the very northern edge of South America. So they're a Western organism. So in North America, in the United States, we have two populations. We have an eastern monarch population, which is basically from the Rocky Mountains east, and we have a western population, which is what we're talking about today, which is the western side of the Rocky Mountains through the California coast. It's very important to know that those are two different populations. They're the same species. There's a little bit of interbreeding, not much. They pretty much are separated and isolated, but they behave differently. And we talk about the eastern population first, which is the right-hand side, of course. Those are the monarchs that make Mexico famous. You've seen the photographs, National Geographic, and you've seen these forests in southern central Mexico of just millions of monarchs. Those are not California monarchs. California monarchs don't do that. The monarchs that we're seeing in our gardens and all over California and the western US also migrate. They just don't migrate to Mexico, they migrate to the California coast, or they should, and we'll talk about that. So, if you look at that chart, you're going to see some yellow lines, mostly heading north in different directions. That's their dispersal in the spring. They're just starting that mode right now. They're leaving their wintering grounds, a lot of them already have, and they're dispersing in the directions of those yellow lines. So these California monarchs that are clustered on the coast here in the winter, they're moving eastward and northward. They'll get up into British Columbia and a little bit of Canada, their furthest reach, and they'll get into Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, New Mexico, places like that as well. The monarchs on the eastern half are moving from Mexico into the eastern United States, all the way to the Atlantic seaboard, and basically through the whole of the eastern U.S. So very, very important when you're talking to your children, your grandchildren, and so on, and you're saying, oh, look at these monarchs in Mexico. It's not the same monarchs that we have here. Really important to know that has a lot to do with conservation as well. So this is just some sort of more monarchs than those dots, but this is a little bit of the distribution of monarchs during the summer months in the western population. They are distributed really very well all the way through the western U.S. up to the Rockies. I don't know what this guy's doing up here. He's looking for a wire. But so the monarchs are really well distributed. They do fit down into Baja and Mexico as well. This map didn't include that. And they'll get off into Canada a little bit they're furthest. It's important to know that the western monarchs are a series of populations during an annual cycle. During that migration, it's not the monarch that's wintering here in Orange County isn't the same monarch that shows up in Montana or Colorado, or it's probably its grandchild or maybe great-grandchild. So as that monarch leaves the coast of California and moves east or north, searching for milkweed, it lays eggs, it perishes. That adult monarch lives for probably about 2 months on average, sometimes more, sometimes less. But its children continue the movement, and then it goes, the child goes a little further when it's laying eggs. That one perishes, or is eaten, or diseased, or whatever happens. And then its children continue that migration. So it's about 5 leaps on average from the point in which that monarch leaves Orange County or California coast by the time it returns. Now, how that happens is incredibly mysterious. How does the great-great-grandchild of that monarch know to come back to the same tree that its originator was at? If you can answer that, you don't need to come to this class. You should be standing up here. So it's an incredible migration. It's one of the greatest migrations on the planet because it's multi-generational. And it's very difficult to understand how that information is passed. So those are where monarchs are distributed. This is where its food plant is distributed, which will be the next section. So monarchs and milkweeds are intertwined and forever will be. This is milkweed distribution in that same western area, and if you want to go back for a second, you see the overlap is pretty obvious. So one The monarch doesn't exist without milkweed. It's codependent. Crazy pig. So, what they're doing is they're breeding, they're traveling, doing both of those things at the same time. They're moving all the way through the western United States, and that's the western population of monarchs. I did want to put one slide in on this butterfly. It's a close relative of the monarch called the queen, and we will see them periodically, mostly in the late summer, early fall, when they tend to, you'll see one once in a while flitting through a garden. Not nearly as common. It's more of a desert species. It doesn't migrate to the degree that a monarch does, but it can be confused with the monarch. It's very similar, has some similar food plants, little, slightly different, but very close. And it's just beautiful, but not as common. Oh, and another slide. So there's a distinction, and on the underside, it's even a little bit more difficult to tell the two apart. But the queen on the left and the monarch on the right, there's a little difference in coloring and spotting. So that's the queen butterfly. It doesn't breed much locally. It breeds in the deserts, but it will move to the coast, particularly in the late summer and fall, occasionally. Okay, so I started talking about milkweed, and that showed us some pictures on where they're distributed. So now let's talk more about milkweed. Let's really get into milkweed. In the United States, we have a lot of different milkweeds. I think 70 some native species in the continental United States. In California, we have about 15 in all of California. In our area, we only have 3 native milkweeds. And those are the 3 on the right, which I'm going to profile individually in a moment. But there's lots of other milkweeds. And one of the lessons that I want to offer is that all milkweeds are not the same. And I think most of you know that, but I want to reinforce that. Just because you're growing milkweed still might not be the answer to how you can help a monarch. So, lots of milkweeds, 70 some species in the United States, about 15 in California, 3 in Orange County, and those are the ones we care about. And this, well, we care about all of them, but from a gardening standpoint, those are the ones only we care about. So here's milkweeds in California. They're distributed almost everywhere. The higher mountains are absent, but they're in the deserts, they're in the coastal plain, they're everywhere in California. That's an assemblage of many, many different species. And Orange County is buried down there in those blue dots. We've got lots of milkweeds growing around us, naturally. So I'm going to talk about the 3 milkweeds that are in Orange County. And I don't expect you to memorize this, but I want you to memorize the concept. Is that we want to, what I want you to do as gardeners and as conservationists is connect the plant and the organism and understand that interrelationship. And we want that plant to be the right plant that it's accustomed to in its natural environment for a multitude of reasons. So we have 3 of those. The most common in Orange County, San Diego County, most of LA County, not counting the deserts, is this one, the narrow leaf milkweed. By far the most common one, also the easiest one to grow in a garden. So it looks in its summer bliss when it's really at its happiest moment. It's in flower, it has a narrow, thin leaf that's hairless, called glabrous in botany. And it looks like that. I've got another picture, I think. Yeah, the flowers are really quite pretty. All milkweeds have these very complicated flowers. I could do a whole lecture on just their flowers and their pollination strategies. It's crazy wild. Unlike any other plant, they don't even have pollen in the normal way. But that's another lecture for another year. So really cool flowers, very pretty. Kind of a creamy color. They vary a little bit from kind of almost white to a very light pink and everything. So this plant, the most common one that you're going to is distributed pretty well through Southern California and Orange County. If you look carefully at that map, notice it's not in the higher mountains or Sangamon Range. It's in the foothills, but not too high up. And also notice one other thing. And these are native populations, these are not counting plants and gardens on this map. Notice also that it doesn't occur very much right along the coast. There's a band there where there's almost no dots. That's kind of important to know. But that's the natural distribution of the plant. Now historically, if we didn't have 3 million homes scattered in that basin area, there would have been milkweed there too. So that would be part of the range too, but most of this isn't habitat anymore. It's urbanized. This is the second most likely species to be found in Southern California. This is the woolly pod milkweed. This one is Carpa. And it has, in some ways, more of the classic milkweed appearance that maybe you remember from books and school, and has a felted leaf, a very hairy leaf, a fat leaf. It's around, and if you know where to look, you can sort of find it in the wildlands, but not nearly as common as the narrowleaf. And it can be grown in gardens. It's very hard to find at a nursery. It's a little bit more challenging to grow in a garden, but it can be done. And monarchs love any of these 3 that I'm profiling here. I don't think there's a strong preference. There's a flower, very similar, but slightly different. These are all perennial plants, so they're semi-permanent in gardens or wildlands. And this is its distribution in California, also not along the immediate coast, although it is here in our coastal foothills, the San Joaquin Hills, and it's in the Sangamon Mountains, again in the foothills. So that's the woolly pod. This is our 3rd species that the last couple of years has gotten a lot of attention from monarch conservationists, and that's because it's one of the earliest ones to emerge and flower and offer food to monarchs, and that connects with the whole climate change issue, and that's another lecture and another time. So it's an earlier milkweed by about a month, not a huge deal, but a month is a big deal in monarch conservation. So it's a little earlier, has the same felted leaf, a little paler in color, a little rosier flower color, and really quite attractive when it's at its peak. So that one is more restricted in Southern California. Locally, it's in the southeastern portion of the Sangamon Mountains. Only a few colonies, not very many plants. I'm actually working with some researchers from Washington State University and U.S. Forest Service and helping to locate those colonies. They're doing seed collection for propagation and recovery. So we're actively working up there on those colonies. Okay, here's the bad news. There's another milkweed that we will see, particularly in gardens, but occasionally in wildlands. And this is tropical milkweed. This one is Persica. And very, very showy, very pretty, very easy to grow. Monarchs love it. They know more or less than the native milkweeds. There's sometimes conjecture about that, but I'm pretty firm on that one. But they love it. You plant it, you will have monarchs. You plant the native, you'll have monarchs too. It just sort of happens. But this one has some issues that none of us knew about at least 10 years ago, and 5 years ago, just the beginnings of learning about it. Here's some of the issues with that milkweed. It's not locally native, that's just a characteristic. It doesn't go winter dormant. It's an evergreen. keeps some foliage at least year-round. It looks a little scrubby in the winter, but it still has leaves on it and can still feed monarch larvae in the winter time. Sounds good. It hosts a protozoan, which is a parasitic organism on its foliage. You can barely see it with our 14 power hand lens, just barely. You can see the protozoan. So it's not visible, but it's on most of these plants that are in our gardens. And it's an ecological trap, which is a biological, complicated thing to explain very, very briefly. This one has a higher level of the alkaloid that causes toxicity, which in some ways protects the monarch from predators. The monarch feeds on the milkweed. Those toxins move into the monarch. The monarch's okay with that, and then the predator comes along, and the predator feeds on it and gets the toxin in it. And predators learn over time, avoid monarchs. Don't eat those larvae because I'm going to get poisoned if I do. So I'm going to confuse you all on this. But the challenge with this one is if monarchs become adjusted to this plant and start feeding on it, and global climate change is happening, and we get a degree warmer every 20 years or whatever it is, the alkaloids build up in this plant to higher and higher densities to the point at which the monarch can no longer use this plant. Even monarchs have a tolerance for that alkaloid. And once it surpasses that tolerance, even the monarchs can't feed on it. So that's called an ecological trap. All of a sudden the monarchs are feeding on it, we're all happy, everything's great, still got these other issues. And then all of a sudden no longer can monarchs use it because of climate change. And now you've got a dead end for those monarchs. I know I'm confused. A lot of silence right now. Trust me on that one, I guess. So here's the protozoan under heavy magnification that persists on this tropical milkweed. That protozoan is on the foliage and stems and so on. The adult monarch comes along, lays an egg on it. Two things happen at that point. The adult monarch picks up the protozoan on its abdomen just by being in contact with tropical milkweed. Now the adult is somewhat contaminated. The other thing that happens is you've just laid an egg on a plant that has these protozoans on it. Those larvae pick up that protozoan as they're feeding. The protozoan does not affect the larvae. The larvae consume it as they're feeding on the foliage. They're also ingesting the protozoan. Doesn't have an effect on the larvae. Protozoan is very smart. It's evolved very carefully for its continued existence. So the larvae consume the protozoan, doesn't harm the larvae. You walk out in tropical milkweed, the larvae are perfectly happy. What do you mean this is harmful? You know, the protozoan affects the adult, and it affects the adult generally after it's flown away and left, and you'll never know it. So the protozoan that's consumed during the larval feeding stage expresses itself on the adult monarch as it's now trying to do that migratory activity that I showed you a minute ago. It weakens the adult considerably. The adult can't migrate very far. It can't compete very far. It has some other environmental stresses because of the protozoan, which is all over its body, and you can't see it. And as that monarch mates, if its mate hasn't got the protozoan on it, the mate transfers the protozoan to the other monarch as well. It's just a whole cavalcade of issues. So, real problem. This was kind of the first thing that researchers started noticing about the tropical milkweed and started some of the alarms, was this protozoan. One of the other things that you might see if you have monarchs in your garden, occasionally you'll see monarchs that have trouble opening their wings. They're emerging from the chrysalis. They have a difficult time expanding their leaves, often not often. Occasionally they'll fail completely, and the monarch will drop on the ground and perish. that periodically on if you have tropical milkweed. So it's very pretty. There's lots of it on the market, and monarchs love it, and it's bad for them, and they don't know any better. But now 60 of you know better. Here's my analogy. So I know there's lots of people who have trouble with this. There's less than there was about 3 or 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years ago, if I just stood up here and said, don't plant tropical milkweed and get rid of it and burn it and never look at it again, I probably wouldn't have been invited because the passion was different. The science is now starting to get out and people are starting to understand. But there's still going to be a few people who are clinging to, well, wait a minute, I've been doing this forever and it doesn't seem like there's a problem. Here's my analogy. If you take a loaf of bread and you bring it to the park, the geese are going to love it. I think most all of you know it's not a good thing to do. They love it. They'll sit there and you can go every day and they'll come and visit, but it's not good for them. Then all of a sudden they don't migrate anymore, they become sedentary, they have, their digestion isn't affected, they're not breathing properly. Yeah, it's a really bad thing. Okay, if you don't care about geese, how about the kid in the candy store? Take your 8-year-old to the candy store and give them $100 and leave for an hour and see what happens. Well, don't do that. Other bad things might happen. But so this is kind of my 2 analogies on the tropical milkweed. Yes, monarchs will feed on it. Yes, you'll raise them. Yes, you'll feel like you're doing the right thing. But you're not. Okay, enough of my sermon. It's not even Sunday morning. Okay, let's go to the next topic. Convinced you on that. Overwintering sites. So one of the cool things about monarch conservation and study is that for a few months of the year, they all collect in a fairly small area. And so you can do some studies and some research more conveniently on a monarch than a lot of organisms. In the western population, almost all of those monarchs congregate along the California coast from Mendocino County, kind of the northern edge, to a little bit into northern parts of Baja, down to about Ensenada. There's about 300, I believe is the number, 300 or 400. 300 or 400 historical sites that they move to every winter. And we can go out to those 300 or 400 sites, a lot of different people, and we can do assessments of their health, their numbers, the quantities, and we can do that over time. And we've been doing that over time since at least into the 70s, probably before that. But very, done very, very well since the late 1990s. Since the late 1990s and all the way through this past winter that we're just finishing, we've been censusing monarchs at these overwintering sites very thoroughly, very scientifically. And we have a lot of data now available regarding monarch numbers and conservation. Those are hard to see. Those little red dots are the historical 300 or 400 sites where monarchs congregate, mostly in coastal California. And here's a close-up of the Orange County sites. These are especially well publicized for obvious reasons. But those are the sites in Orange County that have had historical congregations of monarchs during the winter months. And there's actually 17 sites in Orange County that have been identified and mapped. Not all are still active, and a few of them have been destroyed. And if you go in a little tighter, this is an area in San Clemente, and there's about 6 or 27 sites there. They all have numbers and their whole database and so on. But Southern San Clemente has probably more of the historical sites than other parts of Orange County. Now, if you go back 200 years, you probably have some more public events. But in the last 20 years, those are the sites that we're still checking every winter. And so, when I say checking every winter, what does that mean? What that means is that we go out as biologists and we count monarchs. And we do it in a very specific manner, at a very specific time. And we database them and record them very, very carefully. And if we do that in a scientific manner, year over year over year, for 30 years, you get some really good statistics. You get some really good numbers. And very hard to argue with. So, what's it like to count monarchs? Well, it's kind of this. We do it on very specific time periods. It's called a Thanksgiving survey and a New Year's survey. And so the count in anywhere in Orange County or Mendocino, doesn't matter where, the count starts 10 days before Thanksgiving and it ends 10 days after Thanksgiving. So all of these 17 areas have to be surveyed in those 20 days, and very carefully and accurately and so on and so on. And a little furthermore, when you're surveying monarchs during their overwintering period, you have to be there when the temperature is below 55 degrees. 55 degrees is about their wake-up call. When the temperatures get to that degree, they start moving their wings around a little bit. They start eventually flying around, and they just kind of fly around locally, and they nectar and just enjoy the day. But you can't count them in that environment. So you have to be there very early in the morning. We usually bring flashlights because we're for the first few minutes, and then the light starts coming out. But once the temperature gets too high, they leave the trees. And so surveying is very specific in that time of the year. So here we are at the San Clemente State Park, one of those spots that I showed you, at this particular location where we've had historical monarch overwintering, and those are some of the volunteers who slide on us doing that particular survey. This was at a state park, so we had 3 biologists from Cal State Parks helping us. Usually it's just Bob and I that do most of these. That's Bob Allen, the big ZZ Top-looking character. Over there on the right, he is the coordinator of the Orange County counts and surveys. I'm his right hand, and the two of us do most of these surveys. Occasionally we get some other helpers, and we fill out a field report form, and then we go back and database it and send it off to a state, actually a national organization, and that along with 300 or 400 other sites gets put into a very official looking document on our numbers and contribution. And we do this at each one of the sites. Here we are, kind of wrapping up probably, speculatively, and we're looking up in those trees with binoculars, looking for a monarch. Sometimes you find no monarchs. Sometimes you find 3. So a lot of that. And so here's a few of the sites that we visited this past winter. Most of these are the Thanksgiving count. Oh, I didn't mention there's 2 counts. One in Thanksgiving, one in New Year's. The Thanksgiving count we've been doing for about 30 years. The New Year's count is only about 6 years. We're trying to study some different distinctions between those 2 periods. We think that maybe some of the monarchs are moving a little bit between those 2 days, so we have 2 surveys now that we do. So here we are at Ohini State Park, another historical site. I did a survey here, those are my images, and doesn't look like a big deal, but there's 3 of them, and they're overwintering on that eucalyptus. Typical overwintering, or overnighting in this case. Appearance, wings closed, they're torpid at that point, they can't move. You can walk up to them and just, not supposed to do this, but, examine them, look at them, put them back. It's too cold for them. They're cold-blooded and it's not warm enough for their bodies to be active. So that's typical overnighting behavior, and we count them very carefully and log them and clean them and so on. During the day, they'll go out, they'll feed a little bit on nectar, and just sustain themselves. And they'll be on these trees for 3 months, varies, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, through the winter. Here's another site in San Clemente. Here's one that's a little later in the day, starting to move around. That's another male monarch. Here's a site that I found this year, and trying to get it proclaimed as an 18th site in Orange County. So far, they haven't accepted my offer for that. But if we monitor it for 2 or 3 years and we find monarchs there, it'll probably get added as another Overwintering site. This is also in San Clemente, and there's a monarch right there. There were only 3 or 4, but it would sound like much as enough to make it an Overwintering site. Here's the third site. This one's of special significance to me. This is as mentioned earlier, I work at Rogers Gardens. The owner of Rogers Gardens, this is his garden, part of his garden. So those are Monterey cypress that he has planted along the perimeter in San Clemente, and I know that's a little hard to see for you. There's about 200 to 300 monarchs clustered on that Monterey cypress. One of the biggest colonies we've ever found in Orange County, and it's on my boss's garden. So that's really cool. There's another site, Golden West College, and there's a monarch there. And here's what used to be a very, very famous park, a grove in Huntington Beach called the Gibbs Grove or Gibbs Park. It used to host a lot of monarchs. It has a few now. They're hard to see there, but there's some monarchs up in the eucalyptus. The monarchs always are on the north side of the tree, north or eastern side of the tree, never on the western side because the sun rises from the east and it warms them earlier in the morning, and they're able to become active again. And they know that if they were on the other side of the tree, they'd be vulnerable a little bit longer than the tree. So we always look on the north and east side of the tree, usually at about 6 to 8 meters, 25 feet or so in the air, is about where you're going to find them if they're there. The largest grove and the most exciting grove this year was at Huntington Central Park. There's 2 colonies at Huntington Central Park, Huntington Beach, that have been there in various numbers for 20, 30 years. But this year, we found a couple of really nice clusters. And this is typical early day appearance, wings folded, hanging cluster. We don't know exactly why that cluster is. It might be for warmth. We don't talk monarchs, so we don't know. And then they're starting to awake and they're starting to move, and a little bit later these will have flushed. And same colony in Huntington Beach. This is epic. This is one of the best slides a monarch conservation person can see. Because when I show you the chart in just a minute, you'll know why. So, cluster on this eucalyptus. By the way, they are not specific to eucalyptus. That's a misnomer. They'll cluster on any tree, almost any tree. Just that eucalyptus happen to be present. You don't need the eucalyptus to have monarchs. I want to make sure that's clear. Oh. So that's what we want to see more of. Here's the challenge. Here's the Huntington Central Park, probably 20 meters from where that last picture was taken. And we've got tropical milkweed just kind of growing wild in the shrubbery adjacent to the Overwintering colony. That's the threat. There's lots of it in Huntington Central Park. It was planted. Say no more. And it seeds around, and so it's just kind of there now. And really quite an issue. We don't want those monarchs that are up in those trees to be breeding on that milkweed. It's a threat to that colony and a challenge. But when I was there a couple, 3 months ago now, there were larvae on this plant that were feeding. And that's, just be the creeps. Those larvae right there on the right hand side that were on that same plant. And then just another one. There is some tagging that goes on. Right now, monarchs have some protection, so tagging is a little bit of a challenge. But is tagging. This is a monarch that was recovered in 2019 at Huntington Beach. That was tagged in Oregon and was recovered in Huntington Beach. And it was 4 months after it was tagged. The same butterfly was, this one, was recovered in Huntington Beach. So it took 4 months for that particular butterfly, not another generation, but it made it from Oregon to Huntington Beach, and it was reported, and the rest of the story was figured out. Here's another monarch that was recovered in 2014, I think. I don't know the story on this one. It was also recovered in Huntington Beach from a tagging effort, but I don't know where the tag was applied. So there is some science with tagging and trying to figure out the movement of these monarchs. Conservation. So we kind of talked a little bit about conservation. This chart is an important, really important chart that I want you to look at. Now, so this shows the monarch counts that I just talked about over the almost 30-year period, 23, 24-year period. Very precise, very repetitive, same sites being checked every year on the same dates, essentially, and putting all that information in a summary chart. Now, if you were to take this chart and go back this way a little bit, you'd be into about the 3 million, we think. Kind of the 3 million number of about how many monarchs were wintering in California every year. And it's been a slide, pretty quick slide, ever since. If we get all the way over to here, now this was just 3 months ago, 3 or 4 months ago. But if you ignore that for a minute, if you get right to there, we have less than 2,000 monarchs counted in the entire western United States. 2,000 monarchs in the entire western United States. And they all congregate in these 300 places, 400 places. So it's not like we missed a lot of them. We probably missed some. That was it. 3 million monarchs, less than 2,000 monarchs. In a 30-year period. They're in serious jeopardy. This is not, false alarm. Now, that said, this year, we had a very positive result. This past survey period, very, very positive. We counted about 250,000 in California during that November count. Yeah, but that's 1 year, and the numbers will vary for lots of reasons: weather patterns, food plant, disease outbreaks, various different reasons. So 1 year is not a trend. We've got 35 years of trend. We're not going to say, oh, okay, it's all fixed because we had one uptick. And if you take that 250,000 and put it back against median, it's pretty serious. But the positive, that's a whole lot better than that. I know you can't read that. These are the Orange County sites. I don't expect you to read this, but these are the 17 or so Orange County locations where they winter, and there's the data for the last 20-some years, and here's this last interval here. Let me tighten that up a little bit, and you don't need to memorize all of this, but you know, this is Orange County. So you can see the totals down here in the red box. Very disappointing in 2020, so 14 months ago, we counted one monarch in Orange County. We checked all 17 sites. 6 o'clock in the morning, jackets on, cold, binoculars, flashlights, looking. We found one monarch. This year, during the November count, we found 241. There was actually more than that because that colony in San Clemente moved. We couldn't refine it. So we couldn't count it. Even though we knew it's there, the colony was photographed in late October. When we went out on November, we couldn't find it. And we searched and searched everywhere, we just couldn't find it. So that number is higher, but scientifically accurate is 241. And then we went back in in January, and we found those big colonies at Huntington Beach Central Park. And that colony was about 500 individuals. So overwintering in Orange County is probably about 700-800. But we can't report them all because of timing and so on. That's the biggest count we've had in 25 years in Orange County. So good news, it's 1 year. 1 year. Threats. Whoops. The main threats to Monarch, not just Orange County, but it's kind of a western Monarch situation. Lack of food plant. You're going to fix that problem. Pesticide use. There's a lot of pesticide being used in agriculture that drifts into wildlands. Milkweed typically tends to grow along the edges frequently of agricultural fields, and pesticides interrupt and move into those milkweeds. Climate change, it's complicated, but yes, that's a factor in monarch decline. Logging and development. We think those are the main kind of macro factors. You might have heard of, monarchs endangered species. They were petitioned. There was a 5-year research that U.S. Fish and Wildlife and others did. U.S. Fish and Wildlife made their ruling in fall of 2020, and the ruling was complicated. Basically, they said yes, the monarch is an official U.S. endangered species, but we don't have enough funds and resources to deal with it. And that was their ruling. So, that's part of their whole statement. But yes, it's endangered. No, Fish and Wildlife doesn't have enough resources to deal with the issue. So interpret that any way you want. I don't have too many agency people. I'm talking about Forest Service, state parks, land managers, but nonetheless, what can my agencies do to protect overwintering sites? We've lost a couple of those 17, they're not there anymore. The biggest colony in Orange County used to be in Aliso Canyon in South Orange County. It's all been developed. We still check it every year. There's a few remnant trees. Didn't find a single monarch. But it used to have probably about 10,000. And it's gone because the habitat was lost. We restore breeding and migratory habitat in California. We need to protect that habitat from pesticides, especially. And we need to protect and restore their summer breeding area, which is all the way from California to the Rocky Mountains. And we need to continue to do research and answer some questions that you still don't know. What can gardeners do? Well, this one's relevant. Well, plant native milkweed and plant nectar plants. Now I want to say one quick word on that. Way back, if you look at the maps of where the milkweeds grow, they don't grow right along the coastal strand of most of Southern California. They grow a little bit further away from the coast. That's not an accident. That's because of the whole way that monarchs and milkweeds have co-evolved. We want monarchs to winter here, and we want them to leave. That's healthy for them. You don't want them to be on these eucalyptus and other trees year-round and breeding. Wintering here, breeding 100 feet away, wintering, breeding. It's a very unhealthy environment. You don't get genetic diversity. You don't get a lot of neat things that you get when you have monarchs that are traveling over 1,000 miles. So be careful planting milkweed near an overwintering site. It might not be a good thing to do. And that's as far as I can probably go without running overtime here. But be careful about milkweed right on the immediate coast, and especially around those overwintering sites. It might discourage the monarchs from doing their healthy migration. Along the coast, what you can do and should do, what we need you to do, is plant nectar plants near those overwintering sites. Those butterflies, even though they're wintering and staying sedentary, they need nectar to persist for that 3 or 4 month period. And if they don't have abundant nectar, they're going to have challenges. So if you can't plant milkweed near a site, you should be planting nectar, winter flowering, nectar producing plants, because those monarchs need it. So that's one thing you can do, is protect existing habitat. If whatever influence you have, if the overwintering site is going to be pressure, threat, or pruning, or whatever, be vocal about that. Become an advocate for that overwintering site. Eliminate pesticides in your garden, or at least reduce them. You should just eliminate them. I've been gardening forever. I don't have any pesticides. I don't have a shelf. I don't have anything. I got tons of plants and I never spray anything. You don't need it. That's another lecture. I'm up to about 4 now, and I have to come back. A healthy garden does not need pesticides. Pesticides are because the garden's got some issues. So don't use pesticides. And contribute, when I say contribute monetarily, but I mean engage in some of the science. Coming here, listening to me squawk is part of that. But good read, learn, continue to educate yourself. And then probably one of the main things I hope you can do is talk to others. You have friends, you have partners, they probably look up to you, probably more than you think. And explain the issue. They might not understand, but that's okay. Take it a little step at a time. But share what you're learning today with your neighbors and friends and gardeners. Probably one of the best things you can do. What you shouldn't do is plant tropical milkweed. In fact, you should go one step past that. You should get rid of it. Yes, you should get rid of it. Take it out of your garden. You should avoid pesticides, especially a group of pesticides called neonicotinoids or neonics. They're used called sometimes. They don't say that on the label, but that's what they are. If you want to know more about them, see me. But especially avoid those. They're the most harmful. And don't rear hundreds and hundreds of monarchs thinking that you're helping the problem. You're probably not. It's another feel good. Having an extra bedroom with lights and cages and your monarch cave. Yeah, there's people that are doing that, and then taking them out and releasing them, and I'm saving the world. There's no science to that. There's some issues in doing that. It's not necessarily a good thing. So there's better ways that you can help monarch conservation. And of course, I have to, my boss, I need to share what we're doing. We're doing this. We're talking. We're trying to educate. We're trying to bring the issue forward at Monarchs Gardens, let the gardening world know, and try to take a leadership position. So one of the cool things that I can do, working for a privately owned company, we've got no office in Singapore. chose to take a real interest in monarchs. So, lots of that. We only sell native monarchs. You can't buy tropical. We will order it for you, we won't carry it. We made that decision 3 years ago. It was one of our top selling plants, the tropical milkweed. I went to the owner of the company and I said, you know, the science is starting to come in, this might not be such a good thing. And I can't tell you how much business it generated, it was a lot. And he said, drop it. We dropped it. And we got a lot of very angry feedback, because a lot of people were very addicted to tropical milkweed, as we were, thinking it was a good thing. We dropped it. So we're in the third year now of only selling years. We conduct a milkweed exchange. I'll show you a slide on that next. And we're going to launch, I stole this idea completely from Scott and Sherman Gardens, and I'll show you that too. We're launching a wishing tree next month, and I'll show you a picture of that. And we're engaged in research, I am especially, as well, and Roger supports me on that. This will be our third year, we do a milkweed exchange. If you have tropical milkweed, or a neighbor does, or wherever, if you pull it out, throw it in a bag, bring it in, we'll give you a native milkweed. Free. You don't register, you don't have to sign anything. There's no fine print, well, there's one fine print, it's one for home. Yeah, so, it's the only fine print. We can't afford to replace one of them. But it's just our thing, and if you just bring it in, we'll hand you a new one, and you walk out of the store. You don't have to buy anything. Tell all your neighbors, tell all your friends, tell everybody, and you, and if you come in with a new milkweed every Friday, we probably won't even know the difference. You probably get that. I didn't say that. It's okay. So we've been doing that because this is best. Oh, my slide. That blue thing. Okay, so we're gonna launch what's called a wishing tree, and I totally swayed this idea from Sherman Gardens, so standing in front of Carol and Scott and everybody here, and make my apologies. But they have an amazing wishing tree that's been going on for 3 or 4 years during the Festival of Lights. And I just always loved it. And somehow one night I was having a dream and go, well, I know we could do a wishing tree too and connect it to the Monarch thing. And so we're going to launch a wishing tree. So we're taking this tree, which is pretty iconic, we're in the middle of our nursery, and we're going to offer little monarchs. They're monarchs made out of wood. We're having them made by a guy in Alabama. He's carving them and so on as cheaply as we can have them done. We're going to stain them orange, and you'll be able to walk in and add a monarch to that tree if you make a $5 donation for monarch conservation. It doesn't go to us, it goes to the Xerces Society, the leading conservation organization in North America working on monarch recovery. That $5 contribution, you can write your wish, or the date, or your name, or the score of the Dodgers game, or whatever you want on the back of that monarch, and hang it on that tree and add it to the wishes that are there. And all we ask is that you make a donation for monarch conservation. If you want to have 5 monarchs, great. If you want to have 100 monarchs, that's even better. And we hope that as the summer progresses, that tree just fills up with monarchs and it becomes an iconic way to spread the word. We're just trying to, it's just a way to get people who don't know to know. So, sorry, Carol. I had to do an Okay. But don't do one here, because now you'll be competing with me. I can steal from you, you can't steal from me.
Yeah, I see the right.
So we're going to add that, and that was my conclusion. I thank you very much. It's probably over time. I'm way over time. I don't know if I should get things out of here or I can handle a question or two. I see some hands, so I'm just going to keep going. If you have to leave, thank you, but I can answer some questions. Yes?
Two quick questions.
Yes.
So monarchs have a remarkable ability to navigate the slides regarded as having a brain.
I'm sorry, say it again.
So monarchs have a remarkable navigational ability.
Yes.
The slides regarded as having a brain. And second question is there a particular predator that preys on monarchs?
First question is, do monarchs have a brain? I'm going to defer on that. I'm slower my pay grade. I don't have an issue on that. The second one is predation on monarchs is primarily by birds, as far as macrofauna, larger animals. It's mostly by birds. Even though they have a toxic impact to the bird, that's a learned behavior. There's a lot of birds that feed on monarchs, and it takes them a while to learn that. So birds are probably the main predator in terms of macrofauna. In terms of parasites and diseases and pathogens, there's a whole slew of them that also take out a good portion of the monarch population. I wouldn't call them predators, but they're organisms that impact the members. Right here.
A question on you said what the gardeners shouldn't do, and
Yes.
the second line item was avoid pesticides, especially.
Neonicotinoids.
So you shouldn't avoid them, or you
Oh.
should avoid them?
I probably didn't type that right. You should avoid neonicotinoids. You should avoid pesticides as much as you can, but particularly a group of pesticides called neonicotinoids. I probably had like double negative there. You should avoid neonicotinoids. Don't use those. And they're like Bayer, and I don't know, mention brands that hopefully don't work for them. Like Bayer, Rose and Flower Care, Bayer, three-way systemic, and all of that stuff. That's just the nastiest stuff out there. Not just for monarchs, but for everything. You just,
So I thought that little bit of a tea fly or something that attacks the monarchs. Tea fly, the flies that attack the monarchs. It's a tea fly,
the predatory, parasitic fly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a fly. It's not a house fly. It's not like the common flies. But we have a taxinator fly that is parasitic on monarchs, and they take a portion of them. They're part of the normal biology. If a monarch has 300 eggs in his abdomen, every one of those eggs made it to adulthood, we'd be about 8 feet deep in monarchs right now, and we wouldn't have that chart. But you have all sorts of other ecological problems with monarchs, being too abundant. So that's just the natural balance that nature will kind of have. So taconid flies will parasitize some of those monarch larvae. And it's life. Yes.
There was a suggestion that you would mimic dormancy by cutting on the bag twice in December. Is that still true?
Okay, this I'm glad you asked that because that's one of the comments on the tropical milkweed is that well, if I manage it in a certain way, it mitigates these issues. Yes, that is absolutely true. However, Xerces, me, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, CDFA, CDFW, everybody, we've given up on that. Trying to convince literally millions of people that may have it in their garden to go out every year and take that milkweed down twice a year, plus all of the seedlings that you didn't even know about that hopped over the fence, and do that is an impractical solution. It should be removed. So you're going to hear some conversation about, well, yeah, but I manage my tropical milkweed. Well, one is send the wrong message to all your neighbors. Two is that milkweed isn't staying put. It's moving around. You're not going to be at that house forever. At some point, you're going to move, whatever, and the next person's going to inherit that milkweed and not perform those activities. I could go on and on. Get rid of it. Come bring it into work, we'll get you food. You've got no excuse. Thank you. I'm back on my pedestal. Yes.
My question is, when are you going to start with the plants at Rogers. I think last year, between my neighbors and I, we helped you make payroll.
Oh, good.
With all the plants. Because those will certainly chew out.
When will we have them again?
Yeah.
So that's another interesting question that I want you to be careful of. Selling milkweed now is becoming a big deal. And you're gonna see a lot of people jump into it. And milkweed's available right now. I could bring it in, I could have it at the store. It's artificially heated at this time of the year to make it available before everybody else has it. Don't do that. If you really want what's best for the monarch, you want to follow the natural cycle of that milkweed coming out of its dormancy and providing food. So we think that's going to be about the first week of April. Yeah. So in about 3 or 4 more weeks, we think we'll have milkweed. And this isn't negative to it, I mean, it's in the wrong way, but if you go into a nursery right now, because you just have to have it, and you find it, don't buy it. It's feeding, it's like giving the ducks food. The milkweed shouldn't be in their environment when it's not naturally in its proper period. So we're going to follow the natural cycles. We're going to try to educate. Don't try to cheat, and do it before it's ready or after it's ready. That's not good for them. There was another one.
Yeah, so I got native last year for the first time.
Okay.
So the guide down all the way to the ground.
Perfect.
And so when should I expect to see some life happen?
Probably about now.
Okay, if I don't, it means they didn't survive?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
it does. Right now I'm seeing just an inch or two on some of them. I got a couple of them though that are about like that now. So, it just kind of depends on your little microenvironment and so on. But you might not even see anything yet. It's hard to say. They're just starting to come out of their dormancy. So don't give up. Seed is fine. Yeah, if you can get seed. I have a collection permit from the U.S. Forest Service, so I'm able to go out and collect seed. I actually do some of that. But you gotta, if you're out collecting seed, that's, you gotta be careful about that, because you're impacting some of that. If you've got seed from a garden plant or a friend or a neighbor, absolutely, it's a little bit low patience to grow them that way, but it can be done. It's not terribly hard to grow from seed.
And am I understanding you correctly that I can stay with my tropical milkweed now until you have the milkweed that I can swap with you? Or is it-
Well, okay, that's cool. Well, that's a pickle. Yeah, that is a pickle. So we've got tropical milkweed now, but I don't have the native milkweed ready yet. So should you hang on to it? Oh man. Yeah, easier to plastic. Yeah, hang on to it, and just cut it down or something. Don't plant any Mars overloads on it, or put the rakes on it. Just keep it cut back, and 3 or 4 weeks later. Yeah. Okay, last one. Anyone? Last question. I thank you all. Thank you.